Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 111. A Freilichen Chassidus Nisan and a Freilichen Beis Nisan, which is today. I want to begin by first discussing the contest. The judges are literally in the last phase of determining the winners from among 48 finalists, 31 in Hebrew, 31 in English and 17 in Hebrew. I need a few extra days because of the quality of the essays, and giving it a little more time is always useful. So we hope to announce it in Mitzvah Hashem next Sunday, which will also be the week of Yud Alephness and appropriate, the winners. So stay tuned for that. Being that today is Beis Nisan, and we also always speak about things that are coming up, which are Parsha Metzora next Shabbas and Shabbos Hagadol, the Shabbos before Pesach. So I will discuss that at this stage. Let's begin with Beis Nisan, since it's the day. Beis Nisan, of course, is the yahrzeit, the 96th yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rashab. Beis Nisan, Tov Reish Pei. The year was 1920. And the Rebbe Rashab is Talkus, which is described in vivid and emotional detail in Ashkafta the Rebbe by Rab Berel Rifkin, who was a Beis Harav, a Bocher at the time. And he describes it in detail. Last year, I believe I even read some parts of it. Fascinating read of a description of the stalkus of a tzaddik, of a Rebbe. It's down to the last moment and all that details that come with it. Same time, it's also the same day, is also the Bo HaShemesh, V'Zorach HaShemesh, that when the sun sets, there's also the sun rises. The Frierdiker Rebbe's ascension to the Nesias, which was clear, he was a Ben Yochid, and it was clear that he would be the next Rebbe, and he became Rebbe in the same day, Beis Nisan. The Rebbe speaks about it in many different sichos, the significance of it, and there are many different angles to it. I just want to talk about one particular angle which is relevant to us, because you can argue that's the 5th and 6th generation. We're now in the 7th generation. Yud Shvat is also the same idea. Yud Shvat is talking of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the ascension of the Rebbe, the 7th generation. So why is it so significant to know what Beis Nisan is about? So besides the fact that all the Rabbeim are one thing, as the Rebbe makes clear in the Sikh of Vayetze Yud Kislev Tovshin Yud, why it says Shalshelas HaMoir, not Shalshelas HaOir, why he wrote Shalshelas HaMoir, it's the chain of he wrote Shalshelas HaOir, the chain of light, not the chain of the luminary, on the Sharblat, on the front page of every Sefer of the Rabbeim. And the Rebbe explained, because the Moed is all saints. In the sense of a luminary, a source, all the Rabbeim are one. In their Eir, there's a difference. As we say, the Alter Rebbe is the level of Chochmah, the Mittler Rebbe Bina, the Tzemach Tzedek Das, and then the rest of the Rabbeim all the way to Malchus, the Deir HaShvi, as we know. However, in their Etzem, their essence, they're one. So any day, whether it's Chavdal Tevis, any Stalkus, or it's Yud Tes Kislev, or going through the Tzemach Tzedek on Yud Gimel Nisan, and Beis and Yud Gimel Tishrei, which is the Reb Marash, and Beis Nisan and Yud Shvat is significant because this is talking about the Moed as going through another stage. That's in general, but more specifically, especially, remember, Berini Ktseru comes from Hazerim Bedima. Through those that sow with tears, that's how we arrive to those that reap with joy. The Rebbe's ascension, the Rebbe's assuming the leadership of Chabad in Tovshin Yud came direct outgrowth of the events that took place before Tovshin Yud, the 30 years of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Nesias, and the years prior to that of the Rebbe Rashab's Nesias and leadership. And therefore, it's critical to understand the time in which we are in, the generation we're in, is to understand what came before it. And we know that the Rebbe's leadership began so-called in freedom, in a free America, without the oppression and the exodus, decrees that the Frierdiker Rebbe had to so undergo, to the point that the Rebbe Rashab assured him that he would go through b'chesed u'barachimim. Why? Because why did he need a chesed u'barachim with kindness and compassion? Because of the challenges that the Frierdiker Rebbe had to go through, being arrested, but we're talking about the harshest times in Stalinist and communist Russia, communist Soviet Union, But the Rebbe Rashab as well had to leave Lubavitch 100 years ago, also due to the war that was starting to break out, the Russian Revolution. 1920 was a very, very difficult time following all the pogroms in the decade or two before that. So we're talking about the Rabbeim that lived through tremendous oppression. You could say the Mitzrayim of our modern age. And it was there, the Mina Metzora, in the final stages of the beginning of the 20th century, that really shaped what Chassidus Chabad would be, and Chassidim would become as they would be transplanted, the central headquarters to New York, to the new hemisphere, Chatzi Kadra Tachton, the Rebbe's words. And we know the Sikha, the famous Sikha of Kol HaYetzel Melchemes Beis David from the Rebbe Rashab in Tofrei Samach Aleph, Simchas Torah. He spoke a Sikha which laid the groundwork of the army that he was establishing with the Yeshivas Temchet Mimim, an army, not just a place for more Torah. There were enough yeshivas, he said, of Torah, but also to be soldiers in an army that would take Torah, take Primus Torah, and be armed with artillery to be able to deal with the Chorfu Ikvus Meshichecha, Chorfu Hashem, Chorfu Ikvus Meshichecha, the two challenges that would define the 20th century, both in its skepticism and in its dismissal or denial, basically the assimilation of our modern world, as well as the numbness or the coldness and apathy in regard to Mashiach and everything that we believe in. So the Rebbe Rashab laid the groundwork for that with the establishment of Temchet Mimim, and as a result, the Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, expanded upon that, being the menal of the yeshiva, and as a result, we have the soldiers that are today, the thousands of shluchim, didn't just were born in a vacuum. They're an outgrowth of this army that was established then. So talking about Beis Nisan, we're not just discussing something of the past. 96 years ago, we're talking about events then that the Rabbeim laid out in foreseeing what would be coming ahead of, which would come after World War I and then World War II, the world in which we live today, direct outgrowth of that period in time. And of course, it comes down to the establishment of Yefutzu Meinasecha Chutza, as Mashiach told the Baal Shem Tov a few hundred years ago, that Mashiach will come, that he will come when the wellsprings will spread outward. And that is through this dissemination of Chassidus, applying it into our lives and making it a viable blueprint and a viable guide and directive, as the Alter Rebbe says in the introduction to Tanya, to deal with all the challenges and all the questions that we may have. So the Rebbe Rashab is a Rambam of Chassidus, and the Rebbe Rashab is the establisher of the yeshiva, which was unprecedented. There was no yeshiva before that, no Chabad yeshiva. Bochum in Lubavitch went to other yeshivas. This laid the ground, and this is what allows us today to be able to do what we're doing. And therefore, on a day like this, Beis Nisan is critical to acknowledge that. There's also the classic Sikha from Vayikra Tov Shemem Zayin, where he connects it with Beis Nisan as well, the Nisim that we say now in the month of Nisan. Nisan, of course, is Rosh Hashanah LeMelachim. It's the new year of kings. That's when the new year when the king was considered like this was his new year. And we say the Nisim of all the 12 tribes through the first 12 days of Pesach. Through the first 12 days of Nisan leading to Pesach. And the Nasi, besides the Rebbe being, of course, born Yud Aleph Nisan, the Nasi represents the leader of the generation. And this beautiful Sikh in Vayikra Mem Zayin, the Tavshim Mem Zayin, the Rebbe speaks about the Nitzchias of Nisim, their eternity, and quotes from the Maimer. The last Maimer said by the Rebbe Rashab, and the first Maimer said by the Frierdiker Rebbe, of course, Reish is Goyim Amalek. Reish is Goyim Amalek, and it's very obvious the connection. They were living in Amalek's times. That last Purim in Tafresh Pei, in a very dramatic fashion, when the Yevsektia and those that came to see what is happening in the Chotzed, in the court of the Rebbe Rashab, and they came in and everybody became very frightened because there was money on the table, there was a fabring, and they were doing things that were absolutely illegal and in the danger of death. And the Rebbe Rashab classically and inimitably said, Venischen Spolfen, they said, Klippes, ein Heder, and his own bottle werden ma'atzmon. And that's the theme of that Maimer, and also the words that the Rebbe Rashab said, they're very powerful words. And that's what happened. Suddenly, a complete surprise, utter surprise to everyone, the people who came in, who were mazikim, who came to do damage, just walked out without doing anything. And that was the Rebbe Rashab's last Purim, and that was just a few days before Beis Nisan, a few weeks you could say. And then the Frierdiker Rebbe began also Reishis Goyim Amalek, because that's what they were dealing with Amalek. In stark contrast, what's the last mimer of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the first mimer of the Rebbe? Bosse legani achese kala. A gan and Amalek are very different. Now we're coming into a garden. Legani makim shah ikar shchinim b'tachtenim. Legnuni. The place that he was initially. And the Rebbe explains in a beautiful sikh in the Yud Shvat of Shalamed Beis that this is a beautiful world. It's a gan. Not like those that say it's a jungle. It's a garden. However, it can be concealed. And our job is to return the presence of the divine in this garden, the Dira B'tachtenim. And it's interesting, it fits very well, because in 1920, they were dealing with Amalek, Reishis Goyim Amalek, to do anything possible to eradicate the clip of Amalek. The battles and the wars had to be fought then. And in Tovshin Yud, which is after World War II, began a peaceful era that, thank God, we're still experiencing, of now we can take it and prepare the world for the Geula. Not have to fight Amaleks and enemies in that particular way. We still have our challenges. But the primary work can be an Asay Tev instead of Surmara. Instead of running from country to country with the Yisurim and the challenges that the Frierdiker had, that Rebbe Rashab had in his own way, we now have a Boselegani type of approach. So, but the Boselegani comes out of the Reishis Goyim Amalek. So it's interesting how all these things juxtaposed, when you look back, you connect the dots, you see the flow, you see the stages leading to a time of the seventh generation, and then the progressive decades in the Rebbe's Nesius leading to our time of setting the stage of using Chassidus. That the Rambam of Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab, so elaborated on Samarvov and Ayin Beis, as the Rebbe points out in this famous Sikh of Achos Shapesach Tov Shalom, printed in the back of Samarvov, how those are the two main Hemsheichim, the two main fundamental discourses that in Chassidus itself personify the essence of what it means to spread the wellsprings. So this is Beis Nisan and its significance and relevance to us. Making the Achlot Teva, Chassidus Applied, to do everything we can to learn and teach Chassidus in a way that people realize its treasure, its value in their personal lives. We're here to take the Chassidus and apply it to our real lives. Now, with that, let's move into the next Shabbos, will be Parshat Metzora and Shabbos Hagadol, which have a common theme, as the Rebbe explains in some Sichos. Again, because it's a Shana Muberes, a leap year, that's why Metzora comes out in this period of time. Usually Pesach, without the extra month, would be at the end of Sefer Shmeis, close to the end of Sefer Shmeis, or the beginning of Sefer, actually not this Parshat, Shabbos Hagadol is often Vayikra, sometimes Tzav, and the weeks that lead to that, of course, are the end of Shmois. So the common denominator is Metzora is seemingly a negative thing, a leper. And yet, why do we learn it? Zeis Teres HaMetzora? Because our job is to transform the leper into the highest levels of Kedusha, which explains a strange medrash that Chassidus cites. And that is that it says about Motzossi, David Avdi. What's the word Motzossi? I found David Avdi, which refers to Mashiach. I found him in Zdoim. What was in Zdoim? In Zdoim was, of course, the ancestors of Rus HaMoyaviyah, the daughters of Lot, who would give birth ultimately to Moav, Ammon and Moav, who would become Rus, and Rus would be the grandmother of King David HaMelech. Mashiach Mebeis David. Mashiach Dafka coming from Zdoim. Dafka coming as a Metzora, as the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, that he wraps and unwraps his wounds and bandages due to the wounds of him being a leper, being rejected and being scorned. Why? Because a Golas Dika world does not appreciate Mashiach and Geula, and on the contrary, it's cynical about it and insensitive to it. Charfu ikfus Mashiachecha, as I just said. Dismiss it. They ziddle it. Looking for the right word, they embarrass it, they put it to shame. So the kavanah is why Mashiach has to come from Moav, because as the Gemara says, when it talks about the Chazein Avadya, that the different prophecies about the Geula, so the greatest prophecy of all is Avadya's prophecy, greater than Yeshaya, than Yecheskel, than Yirmiyahu, and so on. Why? Because Avadya was a ger, he came from Edom, came from Moav. What does that mean? Because it says the example of the axe that cuts down the tree comes from the tree. The handle of the axe comes from the tree. In order to transform a world, you need something from the world to transform it. If it's coming from an outside force, you don't transform it from within, which of course is a tremendous applied psychological lesson in life, that so often what we need is to look at something, like we have the concept of antibiotics or homeopathy, is taking the thing itself and using it to become the cure. The illness becomes the cure. That way you're assured that it can never return again. Like the Gemara also says about the Nochash HaKadmeni, the great serpent, the original serpent that incited the Chet Tzadas, that La'asid Love Mashiach comes, will be a Shamish Gadol. It'll be a great servant. That inciter, that one that brought so much pain, so much death, so much suffering to the world, will become a Shamish Gadol, because it's not enough just to eliminate the negative. We have to transform the negative. Extract from it the positive energy, discard the bad stuff, the clippers, the shells, as we discussed in previous weeks. Zdeinas nasle kazochias, shvirosin zui takanosim. We break the shells, their breaking is their repair, and we extract the fruit. So the same is here. The ultimate transformation of the world, which comes through Mashiach, comes dafka, specifically from something that initially may seem negative, a Metzora or Zedayim and so on. So Metzora is the idea of that type of transformation. What's Shabbos Hagadol? So there are many different reasons why it's called Shabbos Hagadol. The Alter Rebbe, Shulchan Aruch, Paskins, he brings, because there was a Nes Gadol that happened that Shabbos, before Pesach. What was the Nes Gadol? The Makkah Mitzrayim B'Pchereim. That the Egyptians, not the Jews, not the Makkahs that Hashem sent, not the Eibishter even, their own B'cherim, their strongest, and their leaders, the B'cher, the firstborn, turned against them. What is that concept? Transformation. Transformation, that they, from within, there was a rebellion, which is, of course, again, psychologically and emotionally and spiritually, the idea of transformation. So as we enter this month of Nisan and we prepare for Pesach, which of course is also about transformation, the Parsha Metzora, Shabbos Hagadol, and the themes that we discussed, Amalek and Basilagani, all come together as a transformative time, helping us not just get beyond our challenges, but to turn our liabilities into assets. Let us then move into a direct question, a new question that has not been asked before, and that is, how can I help a friend believe in him or herself when I struggle with confidence myself? One person put the question, how can I help my spouse in that fashion? Another spoke about a friend. A close friend of mine has a hard time believing in herself. She forgets that she's talented, capable, and a pleasure to be around. I'd love to help her recognize her self-worth and boost her self-confidence, but I struggle with confidence myself. Is it possible for me to help her if the remedy is one I myself am in need of? And if it is possible, how can I help her? An excellent question. So we have in Torah, has every type of question like this answers. There's a famous Gemara that says, "Hamispal ba'at chavere hu nenet chila." What that means is, when you pray for your friend in need, you will be answered first. In other words, if you have a need and you pray for a friend who has a similar need, you will be answered first. Interesting Gemara. Now, it's not meant to be a gimmick. In other words, if you want to get help, go pray for someone else who has the same idea. It means there's some type of connection between us. And sometimes by helping another person, even in an area that you may not be able to initially seem to be able to be capable of, actually comes back to help you. In the introduction to Tanya, the Alter Rebbe says as much when he talks about that all the answers are found in Tanya, in the Sefer, but if you can't find an answer, he says go to people, Gedalim Shabir, the mature ones of the city, as I've translated it, and ask them advice. And he asked them not to not to play the role of shiflish shal sheker, which is misplaced false humility, but to make themselves available. And then he gives them the promise: Meir einei shneim havaya. When you'll help another, both the one you've helped and the one that's helping, both their eyes will be illuminated. The concept of the synergy that we all give toward each other. So even though a person may have challenges with their own confidence, it's not a contradiction. As we all know, we can always give advice to people, something better than we can give to ourselves. And by doing that, and doing it sincerely, with care and concern, and your words from the heart, can come back and help you. That's on a very basic level. Today they have the concept of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons that seem to be affected when you have through empathy. For example, if you see somebody, God forbid, about to slam a door on their finger, you'll almost say, ouch, as if you're feeling it, even though they have not seen it yet. Because we identify. Now this, from a Torah Chassidus point of view, is because we're really one organism, as it says in Yerushalmi. So when one part of the organism is experiencing something, we have the capacity to also experience it if we allow and get our egos out of the way and allow ourselves to feel that connection. So it's not that if you think of ourselves in a collective sense and you're helping somebody build confidence, in a way it comes back and helps you as well. Which is, of course, a lesson in many things in life. We don't have to always be there to help somebody with that particular thing. With that approach, we would not be doing anything for anybody. We'd always say, but am I really capable? Am I really complete? Did I finish the job? But the fact of the matter is, we have the power to empathize with others, and in effect, that itself brings us confidence and brings us strength. So that's a general statement, maybe not so general, more specific. I've also seen different notes from the Rebbe when he writes to people who've gone through difficult situations. He says one of the ways to heal further is to help people in a similar situation because you know something that they don't know. Who else better can identify with someone who has no confidence if someone who themselves are suffering from that same issue? If you go to someone that's brimming with self-confidence and doesn't have any issues with self-esteem, they may not identify with someone that doesn't have confidence. Someone that themselves have that issue, then in a way there's a certain commonality, there's a certain camaraderie, kindred spiritness, so to speak, where you can actually think to yourself, okay, how could I help that person? And being that the other person is not subjective to you, because you're objective, you may be able to come up with advice, and then it comes bouncing back to you, as I said, then it's chila. Sometimes the Torah of the Baal Shem Tov, Nefroin Odom Medaite Shalem Medaite. What does that mean? So the Mishnah is in Pirkei Avos, so he says that MyLife will come up after 120 years. You'll be asked a scenario. What would you do? What should be the Torah ruling of this and this person did so and so and so? And you'll give the ruling because Elam Emes, you have to say the truth. And then they'll say, the person is you. You just ruled on yourself. And whatever you said should be done will be done to you. Which is essentially, in another way of putting it, that when we help another person, in a way it is about, maybe that's the Hashgacha Pratis, as the Baal Shem Tov says, that everything we see is like a mirror. If you see someone dealing with a challenge, and you see it, and you some way, Hashgacha Pratis has made you see it, and made you, even more than that, you're being asked to help in that regard. That means that there's something about that person inside of you, and by correcting it and helping another, you end up helping yourself as well. Practically and specifically, the fact of the matter is we all need to learn Chassidus and learn that we are part of, we're creating the Tzelem Elokim and part of God's greater plan, which is the real root, as I read a note from the Rebbe a few weeks ago, the real root of bitachon atzmi, which is the real root of inner confidence. It's not about how arrogant you are or how confident you are and how talented you are. It's recognizing that you were chosen by the divine himself, by God himself, the most confident entity, because the most necessary one. In the point of view, Mitzusi Matzmuse, the fundamental truth, chose you, a mere mortal, who can be a person who's defined by circumstantial activities and superficiality, chose you to be part of his plan. So by focusing on that, that's how you teach people to build confidence, and that's how it comes back to you, teaches you to do the same. And I've seen with my own eyes, often teaching someone to do something, always strengthens you in that given area. So that's the answer to that question, and similar questions. Another question, unrelated. The Rambam, we know the Rambam's birthday is Erev Pesach, as the Rebbe emphasizes. So the question is about the Rambam. The Rebbe seems to give the Rambam more prominence than others in the Torah world. Why is that? More elaborated upon, it seems like many in the Jewish world do not hold up the Rambam on a so-called pedestal as we Lubavitchers do. Besides for our particular emphasis based on the Rebbe in learning Rambam, can you clarify and prove how the Rambam learned Kabbalah and sources of how it influenced his works? It seems that the Rebbe is the only one of this opinion. I really appreciate proofs in order to be knowledgeable and to be able to answer others. Well, some things that you said here are correct, some are simply not. Okay, let's start with this. The Rambam is not a Lubavitch creation, obviously, just like the Torah is not. These were given at Mount Sinai, was given Torah B'chlal, Torah Shebiksav, and Torah Shebal Peh, Torah B'Pirusha Nitno, and every generation going through the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Rabbanan Savaroi, the Ge'enim, and of course the Rambam are part of this. Now, of course, we don't measure which is a greater Gaon, which is a greater scholar, but there are those outstanding leaders and scholars that have been accepted by Klal Yisrael. The Rambam is the first codifier of Jewish law, Mishnah Torah. So besides the Meir Nevuchim and his Pirush HaMishnayos and Sefer HaMitzvahs and other books that he's written, he is primarily Mishnah Torah. And as he writes in his introduction, a bold statement, that he collected everything that you don't need, all you need is Torah Shebeksav and his Sefer, and you have everything in between. The Rebbe speaks at length about how he wrote this and what other... Yes, so there were people of the opinion during the time of the Rambam in his lifetime that took offense to that. There were people who even actually banned some of his books, especially Meir Nevuchim. But the Ramban, just a generation or two later, came and wrote a major hisnatzlus, a major defense of the Rambam. And ever since, the Rambam just grew in popularity. There was never a time that the Rambam, except that short period, which was, of course, understandable, the Rambam was a real pioneer, and until it really becomes acceptable, as the Rambam himself writes in Hilchos Mamrim, it takes time. Those days, it took time till everybody appreciated what the Rambam is. But the Rambam only has grown in stature and is accepted universally, Sfardim and Ashkenazim. If you ask the world of Brisk, they say they have a monopoly on the Rambam. Brisk is far from Chassidus and far from Chabad. I don't mean far in a bad way. I mean to say they don't identify. It's not necessarily a Chassidish Teruah movement. So, yeah, the Rambam is a fundamental part of Torah, and thousands of books have been written long before the Alter Rebbe even came around. In the Rambam and the Raiva, this machlekes between Rambam and Rashi in interpreting a Gemara. So to say that the Rambam is somewhat of a marginal or not as popular is absolutely incorrect. Anyone that knows the yeshiva world. Now, there's some yeshivas that focus a lot on Rambam, others less. There's the Rambam, there's of course the Rosh, and then comes the Shulchan Aruch, the Beit Hur, and then the Beis Yosef, and the Ramah, and so on. But the Rambam is a prominent force in Jewish life, and is to be reckoned with, and considered a major gadol from the pillars of Judaism. A Moshe ad Moshe, Lekam Kamoshe, is written on his Matzeva for the obvious reasons. Now the Rambam himself, as the Rebbe said, later second thought that maybe he should have written sources as the Chacham Lunil of the French scholars and sages that wrote and criticized him for that. But that doesn't take away from what he's written. And yes, the Raiva and others can disagree in a certain way, but we know the rule is that if it's a place they don't disagree, that means they agree with him. So the Rambam becomes the status quo, the standard by which all halachas follows. So that's first of all. Now the Rebbe, besides talking about the Rambam a number of times, the first big time we see the Rebbe really focusing on the Rambam was in Tavshin Lamed Hey Yutes Kislev, made the major hadran, and then first on Masechta Tamid, and then extended, it became a hadran on the Rambam. One of the classics of the Rebbe, which is not here the place to go into the details, but it's a fascinating discussion on the Rambam and the beginning of the Rambam, the end of the Rambam. And then, just 9 years later, in Tavshin Mem Daled, on Nachman Shapesach, the Rebbe began the takana of learning Rambam 3 chapters a day, 1 chapter a day, or Sefer HaMitzvahs. So in that sense, yes, the Rebbe took the Rambam, and with all the explanations, first of all, it creates Agdus among Jews. Secondly, the Rambam includes Kol HaTeira Kula, even Hilchos of the Mashiach, things about Mashiach and the Beis Hamikdash that Shulchan Aruch does not include, and all the other explanations the Rebbe gave in that talk of the learning of the Rambam. Clearly, the Rebbe saw the Rambam as part of the unification of the Jewish people, unification of Torah, which is a big prime theme in the Rebbe's Nesius. So there's definitely a personal connection in that sense. When I say personal, I mean that the Rebbe made it an emphasis, like he made emphasis on Mivtzoyim, or the Frierdiker Rebbe made Achitas. And that's true, no one did that before that. But to suggest that the Rambam is completely some, God forbid, obscure sefer the Rebbe just came up with and brought into the Sikh is not accurate. As far as the Rambam regarding the Rambam, but let me add one more thing. Then the Rebbe's connection of the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe. Alter Rebbe is Chav Dalet Tevis Yartzeit, the Rambam's Yartzeit is Chav Tevis, and the parallels that he makes. So there you start seeing that the Rambam also had an element of Nigla and Nister. One may not be Nister as in Kabbalah, we'll talk about that in a moment, but rather Meir Nevuchim. She has Sefer on Halacha, the Alter Rebbe has Sefer on Shulchan Aruch. Shnei Oir, and there's the other Oir, the Tanya, and the Rambam, and the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Torah rather, are similar, they're Halacha, and there's the Rambam's Meir Nevuchim, and the Alter Rebbe's Tanya. And many, many other parallels that I've discussed as well on these episodes. So you find these parallels. Then finally, regarding the Rambam and Kabbalah, so there are three opinions. And this is broad. The Migdaleis, I don't have the opinions right here, but there's letters, I think, in the end of Chelik Yud Beis, Lekutei Sichos, the Esophagus, the Rebbe brings in the footnote there, in the Kedeshim, Esophagus Kedeshim, he brings the different opinion. There's an opinion that the Rambam knew Kabbalah, but it was not his shlichus or inyan to reveal it, so you don't really see it in an open way. Only hints. For example, the opening of Mishnah Torah, Yesed HaYesed is V'amud HaChochmas. Yesed HaYesed is V'amud HaChochmas is the Rosh HaTevis Havaya, as the commentary explains there. And the second opinion is that he learned Kabbalah at the end of his life. It was revealed to him. And there's a third opinion that he did not know Kabbalah. The Frierdiker Rebbe also has sichos in Tafshin, I believe. I'll look up the sources if you can't find them yourselves and share them the next episode. But the Frierdiker Rebbe also speaks about these opinions. Regardless, even if you go with the opinion that Rambam did not know Kabbalah, everyone has their shlichus. Just like Rashbi was both of course, a great Tana in Shas, but also the Mored Pnimis HaTeira, he's the author of the Zohar, author as in dictating it to Rabbi Abba. And Rabbi Akiva was not that, even though Zol Gudain of the Moyes, he cried when he heard Pnimis HaTeira, and they knew Pnimis HaTeira. But everyone has their role, just like Shammai is Gvura and Hillel is Chesed. So there are roles to play. The Rambam's role was halacha, including maybe Meir Nevuchim, the things that Rambam broke through. Even in Chassidus, it talks about the machlekes of the Rambam and the Maral, where the Rambam says, Hu Hamada, Hu Yidei, Hu Yedua. The Alter Rebbe brings it in the Hagos in the beginning of Tanya and also in Shari Chud V'Amuna. That means he, God, is one with the knowledge, and one with the knowing, one with the knower, and one with the thing that is known, as opposed to us. We know things outside of us. The Eibishter through Yediyas Atzmi, Yediyas Kol Nevroim. And he says this idea is not possible to understand. We can't understand how God perceives things. And the Maral comes and disagrees. Maral, more in a world of Kabbalah, what does he say? That the Eibishter is not Das. How could you attribute Das to the Eibishter? He's not one with his Das, he's higher than Das. And what does Chassidus do? It reconciles. And the Rambam, he says, Hey Delay Chachmei Kabbalah in Atzilus. It is Bekelim, there, Hu Hamadu Hu Yedei, Iu V'gar Chayu Echad, Iu V'gar Mu Echad. You are one with your Eidus and one with the Kalim. Sometimes one with Meichen and Midas, according to the Arizal's Taich. But regardless, there's a unity of the divine as it manifests in the structure of existence, the cosmic order. And then there's L'mayla Atzilus, L'mayla Ishtalshus, then obviously the Eibishter is Chakim V'lei B'chochmi Yediyah. And his Yediyah is higher than the Yediyah that we are aware of, that we can't just say he's one with the knowledge as we know knowledge, to the point where he's in general altogether beyond and transcends all definitions and all faculties and attributes. So there you see right away from Chassidus that you need both. The Rambam played the role that he had to play and explained it in that context, in the world you could say of Seichel, in the world of structure, the world of Atzilus, etc. And then there's dimensions that Chassidus comes and reveals that are higher dimensions. Though the Rambam himself alludes to it in the famous Seichel Lamed Hey that I mentioned. What's the second halacha? The first halacha is you say this, V'amud HaChochmas, sheyesh motzirishin, umenu nimtzu kol mitzoyim, everything comes from this motzirishin. V'im yala al das and halacha beis, as the Rebbe explains there in that Hadron Lamed Hey, if it should arise in your das, the word das is used, and yala, that hu ein motzei is ein davracha yochel motzes. That he's not ein motzei, which literally people think means that there's no God. How could the Rambam say that in halacha? It means that he's beyond motzei, as the Rebbe explains. Then nothing else can exist because God is not applying himself and investing himself and engaging with the stage of existence. So you see that Rambam also hints to something beyond. But the Rambam is primarily halachas. He's dealing with halacha, with dealing with transforming this existence to be aligned with the divine plan. And much of this is elaborated on that Hadr and other Hadronim and other places where the Rebbe speaks about the Rambam. So, in the context of taking the Rambam and understanding the purpose of existent creation, absolutely, the Rambam plays a central role, especially in the later years from Lamed Hey and on, Mem Dalet and on, in the implementation of the plan of the Deir Hashvi in bringing the Geula. And as the Rambam ends, Mola Orez Deis Hashem Kemaim Layam Mechasim, again the language of Halacha and Psukim. a world that will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. The entire involvement of the world will be nothing but to know God. In the language of Chassidus, in the words of the Alter Rebbe in beginning of chapter 37. Next question. I can't figure out why people seem to be jealous of me. I'd like to address a problem that I have, although I can obviously only present my side of the situation, but I can assure you that I discussed this with 2 close friends before writing it. I always had a big group of friends, as I am friendly by nature and a giver by nature. I was appreciated and very well liked for quite a few years. God runs this world, and thankfully He helped me open a new business which really flourished and was a great success. Besides the fact that I was able to afford a nice home, people started asking my advice in business, and my status in the streets really went up a lot. I think I can honestly say that my relationship toward my friends and acquaintances did not change at all on my part. I always pick up the phone on my friends, always help them, and even advise them in business without asking for anything in return. It didn't take long for me to start feeling the vibes of jealousy that I was able to smell and feel in the air. My approach and strategy always remained to continue doing kindness and never ever confronting anyone I heard had spoken against me or the likes. As time went on, the issue only escalated, and there was much talk around the coffee tables, quote unquote, about how I do things dishonestly or how my business strategies are having a negative effect on different people, and such kind of gossip was literally baseless. I kept on checking in on myself as well as asking close friends if I'm doing anything wrong or if all this jealousy is really unfounded and totally uncalled for. And I kept on getting the response that I'm doing fine and that I should just continue by expressing and giving both positive energy. What should I do about all the gossip going on behind my back? Do you have advice for me to deal with all this nonsense once and for all? You may be wondering, if you don't do so much kindness, what is all the gossip really about? If you are doing so much kindness, what is all the gossip really about? So I'll explain a drop more, although I don't really have real explanations. I've heard people say that my confidence is egoistic. I've heard people say that I'm too strong-minded about advice that I give others, strong-minded about the advice that I give others, as if to say that I force people to listen to my advice or to consult with me in the first place. Is there really anything I can do to stop this, or is it just people's lack of good character traits that is not in my control at all? Always have to begin with a disclaimer. I don't know the person writing this, and I don't know all the details. I don't know if this is an accurate picture of what's going on. Is it your oversensitivity? Is it maybe is it distorted in any way? And I'm not suggesting that it is. I'm just pointing out that whenever looking at any situation, you can't just look at face value. I'm reading what you're writing, and I will respond as best to my ability, but I need to qualify, because not knowing all facts and not having all questions answered, sometimes my advice will be missing or actually be even off. So, with that said, a few things come to mind. Yes, there are jealous people out there in the world. Let's start with that. What do you do when someone's jealous? To say that we're always at fault, a Chassidus may say that. There's a famous story of Rab Nisan Nemanov and the Rebbe, that people wrote to the Rebbe about Rab Nisan things, and Rab Nisan went to the Rebbe in Yechidus and asked for a tikkun for the Ra Hanelam, for the evil in me that is concealed, that I don't know about. And the Rebbe said, what do you mean? He says, I know people are writing things about me to the Rebbe, and the truth is, I can't find it inside of me. So I'm looking for a tikkun to fix something that I don't know about. I don't know if we know what the Rebbe answered him, but the Rebbe did show the note to someone, one of the Miscarriages or somebody, and said, this is a Chassidus Shirit. That means even when other people, who may be their issue, but because they're saying it about him, it means that somewhere he may have something subtle or not so subtle that needs to be looked at that he can't see. So if you go with that approach, then anything said about you, even if there's no basis to it, or at least not a fundamental basis, as a Chassidus Shid, yes, there may be lessons to be learned, that you need to talk to Mashpia and see if there are things that maybe they're unjustified that they behave that way, but maybe that you can do just to repair, not to make them feel better and not because they'll change. They need to do what they have to do, but the fact that it's coming back to you could be, it's an opportunity to refine yourself further, and without any cheshbon, not because you're going to come back and say, hey, now I'm not this way anymore. Like me, stop being jealous. They may become even more jealous. So the first thing is, from a Chassidic point of view, to look at yourself is always a healthy thing to do. You hear critique, it's always good to look at Ev as a Bekatis. We don't like critique, but it's actually what makes us from good people to great people, from average to excellent. So that's one, even if there's no real basis. Number two, we have to know there are people out there that have midas, not always the best midas. There can be what's called not forgiving. People do not, schadenfreude, they just do not like when someone else is successful. There's jealousy, there's pettiness. Sometimes it reflects on people's own insecurities. You know, when you see other people successful, it shines a glaring light on their own deficiencies and inadequacies. You can't do anything about that. You could always be kind and nice, but you can't go around and trying to ingratiate yourself to everybody, because there are many people that need to work on their own midas. So I'm adding that second thing into the equation, that we need to be aware of that. So if you work on yourself and things as Ashgacha Pratis would have it, someone said something or it came back to you, great. It's nothing to do with the fact that whoever is doing what they're doing, we don't know. Now this again is all qualified. Maybe there is something that I'm missing here. Maybe there's something that these one so-called friends suddenly turned on you when you were so popular. Maybe there's something that happened that you're not aware of or you're minimizing. So I'm qualifying that. But even if not, the two steps I just suggested, that's the Chassidic approach to taking. And this is also true not just about jealousy, it's true about other things. There are people that are just, unfortunately, that hate, that have dislike, that are bitter. They take out their bitterness on others. So in general, it's always best to be around people who exude positive energy, who have a little bittul and humility. And it could very well be your success in business, as you put it, ambition and success, has stepped on some toes, and people feel that you're too proud of yourself and so on. There may even be a truth, as I said to it. So all this has to be taken into account, and I think you have to stop worrying so much about what other people say, because that's not what should shape your life. What should shape your life is living the integrity of what Torah and Chassidus and the Rabbeim want from us, not what others think about us. And if you do that, you're just going around in circles trying to satisfy and please everybody. It's also not an Indian. And I think it's a combination of these factors that need to be employed here. Okay. Next question. Exposing children to Kedusha. We know that the most impressionable stages of life are the early ones. And therefore the Rebbe advises us to filter what we expose our children to, like showing them images of only kosher animals. What is the source for this advice? Why is it so important? To what extent should we go in keeping our children's environment solely one filled with Kedusha? Another questioner puts it this way. First of all, thank you very much for your weekly lectures. You bring much needed clarification of Chassidus like no other. It is widely known that the Rebbe emphasized the importance of surrounding the child with Kedusha and avoiding exposure to images of non-kosher animals. Being a new parent and highly motivated to fulfill the Rebbe's guidance to the fullest, I bought the baby only items that display kosher animals. But now as the children get older, it becomes increasingly difficult to do so. Additionally, we see a lot of frum Chassidish people who are very slack when it comes to this topic. They let their children play with teddy bears or have books in the house that contain non-kosher images. I don't wish to take others' weaknesses as an excuse for myself, yet I wonder whether I am too strict. I also notice that it is mostly the Lubavitchers who are strict about this matter, as most from children book publishers do display some images of non-kosher animals. What if we don't keep books with non-kosher animals in the house, but would it be okay to borrow them from the library for a short period of time? I'm looking forward to your answer, as I have guilty feelings when showing these books to my children, but on the other hand, I do see the necessity for children to learn about their environment. Also, I simply have a particular difficulty finding good children's books that are 100% kosher. Okay. Very good topic to address on many levels. And I would just add, even though it wasn't spelled out, but let me spell it out. The question is also to what extent to go, to what extreme to go. So I think it's important with all matters like this to understand, let's call it the concept, the philosophy around it, the ideology around it, and the practical application. Let's start with the philosophy, and then I'll get to the practical application and also indicate which sikhs and the sources and so on. The philosophy comes down to simply this. We were sent to Earth for a mission, a purpose. When you send an astronaut into space, Every step, what he eats, when he eats, how he behaves, every step is calculated and preordained and pre-spelled out because he's in a dangerous area. He's in outer space. He needs to have the right uniform. He needs to have oxygen. He needs to have food. He needs other things to sustain him or her. So the same as when we come a mission in this world, the reason we have a Torah is because a mission in this world, all paths are filled with danger. Danger of many sorts, physical, spiritual, psychological, and so on. So the Torah gives us a whole series of behavior mechanisms, if you wish. Do's and don'ts, just like the astronaut, in fulfilling our mission. But our mission is not just to survive on this earth, it's to transform this earth. And as such, we need even more direction and guidance. How do you do that when you have a hostile universe? And hostile can again be corrupt forces, selfishness, people's own temptations that seduce them, the whole list, the whole gamut. I'm not going to go through every challenge we each have. So we have guidelines for this. Now, as parents, the fifth God gave us a gift. For some reason, he entrusted his children with us, his new souls that he sends down to this earth, that are untouched yet by the blemish and unblemished by the pollutants and toxins of this universe. He trusts us with them. What do we do when we bring a child home, a healthy parent? You have a clean linen, you have a clean room, everything is fresh. You want your child to be surrounded, let's start from a physical level, in a healthy environment, without toxins, without poisons, without anything. You don't want infections and so on. The same thing is spiritually and psychologically, and even more so. That's why we surround children with the letters, the Hebrew letters and the Hebrew psukim, and so on, because especially as the child's early years, as you said, impressionable, the Rebbe's example of like a warm ball of wax. Every impression in this warm ball of wax will harden as the child grows into an adult to the point you won't be able to then extract it. It'll become part of the psyche and personality of this person. So in this warm ball of wax, we want to surround it with the right environment in every possible way. Physical health, spiritual health, psychological health. And this, yes, I wouldn't call the word obsession, but I think you could use the word extreme. You want it to be extreme. Now, what does extreme mean? No, you're not going to put your child, unless God forbid, doctors say so, in a bubble. They shouldn't breathe the air. You're not going to isolate them from the whole world because there are toxins out there and there are all kinds of other stuff. But in every possible way, you will protect the child. So the same thing is psychologically and spiritually and emotionally. For 9 months, the child is protected in its mother's womb, in the embryonic fluids, similar to how the world was created, surrounded by water. Mayim b'mayim, everything was in water. Purification, like a mikveh. And when Mashiach comes, Mola Aris Deis Hashem Kamayim Le'em Mechasim, it will return to that type of state. So we want to keep that type of environment as the child emerges from the mother's womb after learning the entire Torah. And Mashbiyan Eisei, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, Tehi Tzadik V'al Tehi Rasha. Mashbiyan from the word V'savota, to be Mazbiya, to sate and saturate the child with all the resources that we'll need to deal with this world. So you want to maintain that edge of keeping the child armed, because there's going to be many challenges in life. And that's why in the early years, children are sheltered and protected and nurtured. And it's only a slow process when children begin to engage with the world around them. That's the way God made it. So as parents, healthy parents, we want to do everything possible to surround them with the best possible influences. It's not about a teddy bear or a mouse or Mickey Mouse or something of that nature, which the Rebbe alludes to in the Sikha I'll soon mention. That's the technical part of it, which is, we'll talk about in a moment, implementation. There's a spirit to it all. And when you have the spirit, in general, you become less obsessed with details because you understand what the spirit is. Now, if, God forbid, the child comes into the house and they have a teddy bear or something, start yelling and screaming is also not a healthy environment for the child. There are ways to do things gently, kindly, compassionately, all saturated with love. So that's the philosophy behind it. And there are more details to this philosophy besides the impressionability of the child, is because what a child sees and hears will affect the child, even what a pregnant mother hears and sees. And here I refer you to the Sikh of Chav Cheshvan Tovshin Memdal, which I had the schus to actually write, and the Rebbe heavily edited it when he came out with this proclamation. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 25, page 309, 310. Chav Cheshvan Memdal, the birthday of the Rebbe Rashab, whose Yortzeit is today. And the Rebbe spoke about it and spoke about the power of sight and vision and how things affect us. But if you look at the psyche, you'll see the Rebbe qualifies. For example, going to a zoo. A zoo has non-kosher animals. There's the Rebbe speaks about in Chumash, you learn about the non-kosher animals. Rashi describes them. There's the blessing we make when we see certain animals. So once you, however, it's connected to the divine, remember, every creature on earth was created by God. The Rebbe speaks there about the Pnei Ari, the lion that we see often on the Parechas. A lion is not a kosher animal. So clearly it's not some type of black and white thing. But that's in areas where all of it you'll see is connecting, it's something, learning from, we say every morning. We say we should wake up in the morning, Rotz Katzvi, okay, that's a kosher animal. Oz Kanomar, like a leopard, that is not a kosher animal. Gibber Kari and Kal Kanesha. So 3 out of the 4 are not even kosher animals, and yet we say we should be like them. Why? Because they are God's creations and they teach us lessons. So it's all part of the holiness in it, once you recognize that. You go to a Gan Chayot, when you go to a zoo, and you go with that approach as well to show God's creation, you're revealing godliness in this. But in places where it's not necessary, just playing around, or things where you could have the option of something that is kosher and pure, or holier, or tahir, then obviously that's obviously the better approach because of this reason. So there's a context to it, which I just described, and there's the practicality of it. Practicality is whatever possible, yes. To go crazy if something happens that someone either gives you a gift and so on, not necessarily. I'm not going to suggest that you have to throw out everything, but read the Sikha and you'll see the spirit of it, and then decide what standards you want. But it's not just the animal, the stuffed animal and so on, it's the whole spirit of it. Because I've seen people who follow the Sikha very well, but the spirit of the home, they're arguing the whole time. I've seen couples, their whole day they fight. And yet they don't have one non-kosher animal, but they have a non-kosher environment. It's like they say you could eat kosher and not be kosher. There's something called spirit as well. Environment, the mood, and so on. And that's the context of this discussion here. And I think that's the way to look at it. I hope I answered the question. And we have to also not become crazy and neurotic about things. We have to do things with balance. And yes, people will be exposed. The more holiness our children are exposed to, the more they'll be able to find holiness, even the unholy places in this world, including the unholy or unkosher animals, and so on. Because it's inevitable. You're going to go out on the street, you'll see an advertisement. An advertisement may have a giraffe. A giraffe happens to be, I think, kosher. No, a giraffe may not be kosher. I think it is kosher, you just don't know how to shecht it. But they may see a leopard, as I said. They may see a hyena. They may see whatever it is. There are rodents around, unfortunately, the cockroaches and other things. But when you're surrounded by holiness, then you know how to discover it in every part of God's creation. Even in a spider, as King David learned when he questioned why a spider, and the spider came to save his life. Okay. As I said, the Sikha again is in Chassidus Sikhas, volume 25, with sources and fully annotated with all the qualifications. It's a must-read for any parent because you shouldn't just hear it from others. It's a few pages, 2-3 pages, not long Sikha. And there's an interesting, actually, anecdote that I would just share with that Sikha. Let me see if I could just fit that in here. I'll do that. In that Sikha, the Rebbe spoke about different images that are made, that were made in books that teach children Aleph Beis. And he said, for example, the Aleph, in some old books, you found the Aleph was described because he wanted to show images that children relate to, a water carrier, an Aleph. When we gave the Sikha for editing, in the second edit, we found a picture. The Rebbe made a picture on one of the pages, and we couldn't figure out for the life of us, what is this image? It was a round circle with like 2 legs, and then on the side was a line with 2 boxes. I already gave it away halfway, but we didn't know what was it connected to. And it took us 2-3 days, and finally I discovered. Because in the Sikha it says that the Aleph is like a water carrier. The Rebbe was making a picture of a water carrier. How is an Aleph a water carrier? Because the Aleph has, as we know, a Yud Lamaila, and a Yud Lamato, and a Kav and Sevishin. So the Yud Lamaila is like the head of the person. The Yud Lamata is like the leg. And the line that goes across, the diagonal line, is like the 2 pails that used to be carried by a water carrier. They would carry 2 pails connected by a rod, by a stick. And if there's a certain angle, it looks like an Aleph. So when we sent it in back to the Rebbe, Rashi sometimes you'll find, in other places you'll find kazeh, an image. We asked the Rebbe whether we should put the image the Rebbe drew. The Rebbe just crossed it out and didn't let it in. But it was one of the rare times that the Rebbe actually drew an image And it was a puzzle for a number of days. Connection to this Sikha Chaf Cheshvan Tafshin Dalad Mem. Okay, one more question, then we go to the Chassidus question, miscarriages follow-up. So I specifically did not want to address what some people wrote to me was, why didn't you speak about it in Ruchnius and Spiritual Chassidus Applied? I specifically did not do so because I was talking about, firstly, the empathy and compassion. Anyone going through such a difficult thing, I can never fully understand it as a man, but as a woman going through the loss of a child in the middle of pregnancy is not a simple matter. And I wanted to address that in a focused way without any type of distractions. But we cannot ignore, there is the ruchnius of it. And I want to just say a few words about that. And I want, with the qualification, it's not connected one with the other. So the ruchnius is the famous pasuk in Parsha Mishpatim, which is Lo tiyeh mishakela v'akora ba'artzecha, which follows the pasuk Vavadatem es Hashem Elokeichem, and then afterwards that's Mispri Yemecha Amale, etc. So everyone knows this pasuk from the Maimer, the classic Maimer of the Rebbe in Tafshin Yud Beis. The Rebbe spoke about this in a very powerful way with tremendous tears, and based on the Maimorim in Teira Eir, in Teira Chaim, and Eira Teira, which is respectively from the Alter Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe, and the Tzemach Tzedek on this pasuk. And in the Chassidus unique way, the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe elaborates, that explains what's Mishakele Tia Mishakele V'Akara. So Mishakele is there'll be no miscarriage, and there'll be no Akara, which means no barren woman that will not bear children barren in the Atzacha, in your land. What does it mean? So it talks about the following, Vavadatem es Hashem Elokeichem, when you serve God properly. So when serving God, first you serve with the mind, you contemplate. The mind gives birth to midas, emotions. And you could have several scenarios. You could have an akara, or an akara. What's an akara? Someone that can't give birth. What does that mean? That the mind works. They're able to be stimulated in their mind, but it doesn't come down to an emotion. There's no birth of an emotion. And then explains in akara itself. There's another level where they can't even have. There's no base kibble. There's no womb even. Which means there's not even the intellectual stimulation of the emotions, called midas sichlim, the emotions that are intellectual. Sometimes you get excited in your mind. Here too, it's just a cold appreciation, but you don't get the excitement, the passion, the intellectual passion. So that itself is two levels. But then there's another thing called a miscarriage. What's a miscarriage? Miscarriage means there was a birth of a mid. However, it wasn't sustainable, didn't last. So he's talking about there, the Aveda, where you could have an awakening, but you need to do the mitzvahs, you need to do other things to really feed it, to make sure. It's like the sapling has pierced the earth, the seed has been planted, the seed has conceived, there's a life, but if you don't nurture it, and you don't do what's necessary, it does not sustain it. And he says, Ba'artzecha, the Rebbe teaches, Ba'artzecha, based on the Maimorim, Ba'artzecha means with your rotzen, with your spheres rotzen. And he teaches it very interestingly. Dafke Ba'artzecha, if you do it Ba'artzecha in a way that you are satisfied with your Aveda, which means you sense yourself, there's a certain element of ego and sense of self, that is that which doesn't allow the sustainable child to continue to grow. So that's the Aveda in Chassidus. The Chassidus explains the concept of Mishakela. Again, I don't want to connect the two. This does not mean in any way, no one should read into this, that when a person doesn't have the proper Aveda of Mechin and Midas, that is the cause for the spiritual lack of spiritual miscarriage is cause for a physical miscarriage. Not at all the case. The Rebbe will never make such associations, and I will not make such associations. As a matter of fact, after the Maimon and Tafshin Yud Beis, the Rebbe actually gave a bracha that all those that have not yet born children should bear children. All those carrying children should continue to carry them. The Rebbe gave a bracha, so it's very clear that the bracha is there. But Chassidus, nevertheless, also talks about these matters on a spiritual level, which is what I'm filling in here in this segment. And again, the Eibusha should bless that everyone should have both Beruchnis and Begashmis. B'zera chai v'kayoma, children healthy, sustainable, and living for Arichis Yom v'shanim tevis, to Mekayim and fulfill God's plan and God's mission, their mission in God's plan in this world. Okay, let's conclude now with the Chassidus question and the essays. What is the Chassidus question? Emunah and bitachon are two fundamental principles in Judaism, which require constant cultivation, as elaborated upon in Chassidus. Re'ei emunah, to cultivate, as I mentioned, cultivation. Believing and trusting in God and recognizing the virtue in everything are all lumped under one umbrella and definition of emunah bitachon. I know that each one is a different type of avodah, service, but what is the specific and practical difference between the two, between emunah and bitachon? In others ask the question in different terminology. I'll read it as well. Even after all I was taught in Chassidus, when it boils down to it, I really don't know the basic explanation of emunah and how it differs from bitachon. Are they chiyuvim, meaning are they requirements, mitzvahs, pre-programmed thoughts, embedded beliefs, things we have to achieve? Are there levels of emunah bitachon, or is it believer or non-believer? In what must one believe, and what is considered a madrega, a level? And at the same time, what's the true source of the phrase tracht gut wird sein gut? Is it a promise or a theory? Does it have a source, or is it some type of positive energy thing, like what today is known as the law of attraction, which doesn't seem to be too connected to Yiddishkeit at all? Please do justice to this topic for the benefit of all your listeners, and may you be zeichet to spread the light of Chassidus across the world. Question number 2, what is the meaning of bitachon? Does it mean believing that Hashem will do whatever I think is good for me? Or does it mean that I should be happy with what Hashem does with me, or both? I've heard so many different opinions and I feel very confused. I would appreciate if you can give the Rebbe's approach to this. Okay, so let me refer you immediately to the Sikha, classic Sikha, in Chilkut Sikhas Chelik Lamed Vov, chapter, volume 36, page 2 and on, right at the beginning, the first Sikha on Shmais. There he cites sources, and always nice as Sefer V'Nechza, bring a book and let's look inside. And I say this again and again. The foundation of this whole Chassidus Applied, MyLife Chassidus Applied, is looking into the sources and applying them. It's not about just coming up with ideas, nice ideas. It's about looking at the sources and applying them. To appreciate emunah bitachon, this is a must-read sikha. There are other sikhas as well, but they're all cited in this sikha. So let's just first define the words. Emunah, the best translation is faith. Bitachon means to trust. The Tzemach Tzedek brings, look in Erech bitachon in Sefer Lakutim, from the word tach, from the word batuach. So we say the batuach, we say vani eftach boch, eftach. We have different bichabotchu aviseinu. All a matter of trust. Trust and faith, if you think of the actual words, are not the same thing. And the Rebbe cites actually from Shara Bitachon, is the gate of trust, Bitachon, in Cheves HaLevavis, as well as from Shari Tshuva of Rabbeinu Yena, as well as Reishis Chachma. These are 3 books that talk about Bitachon at length. And essentially, in the Sikha, he says the following. Bitachon is not just emunah in God's ability to do good and to save us from any type of tzara and challenge, but you actually trust God that He will actually do it. So that's the first difference. One is faith that God could do anything. You believe in God created the world, and God has the power to do anything. Trust is you actually believe that He will do something in helping you either from a difficult situation or helping bring goodness into your life. And bevadai, and for sure so. The language of the B'cheves Lavavis, shemuchusa betachon hu menuchas nefesh habeiteach. The personality, the essence, the core of bitachon, of trust, is the peace of mind of the one that is trusting. U'sheyeh liboy samuch al misha botach alav, and that his heart should be dependent and relying on the one he's trusting in. Sheyasa hatev, that he will do the good, v'hanochen, and what is right, loy to him. And the thing that he is trusting him in. So when you say someone, I have faith in you, you could have faith in them, and that's that. It ends there. But when you say, I trust you, I'm trusting you, as the Rebbe speaks in some of the sikhs, in God we trust, on the dollar bill, on the currency, American currency. It's not just in God we believe. In God we trust, which trust basically we could say is a verb, and emunah is a noun. Emunah is a noun. Faith. I have faith. It's not an active noun. Passive. And bitachon is an active verb. I trust. I'm trusting you. I'm trusting you that you're going to do this for me, and you're sure that it will be done this way. That's the basic difference in the two. Now, he goes on in the Sikha to ask the main question. Emunah, okay, faith, but how are you so sure? How are you so sure that God is going to do that is going to do that which you believe He will do? How do you trust Him so? How do you know for sure? And he goes on to explain that you can't say that this is only a psychological thing for the gavra, for the person. That like the language of the Chavis Lavovis, that it's only the person that has menuchas hanefesh. In other words, it's not about what really will happen. I trust God and I can go to sleep now and rely that He'll do what's right. Because he goes on to say and explain in the next chapter, the next section of the psyche, he says, because bitachon clearly means not just you will have the peace of mind, that you actually trust that things will be different. And the Rebbe then answers that with the Tzemach Tzedek story. So to answer your question, it's a direct source in the Tzemach Tzedek that someone once came to Tzemach Tzedek with a child that was ill, and the doctors had given up hope, and that Tzemach Tzedek said, "Tragt gut wird sein gut." And the Rebbe explains this, and then what happened was, that's what happened. The thinking good created the goods. And the Rebbe explains because trust creates that connection. I don't use the word mirror neurons, but the type of connection that you actually draw down God's power into your life when you trust Him. So in a sense, you're eliciting that strength. So Tragt gut wird sein gut is not a haftach, it's not just a promise, it's not just a nice thought. Its actuality is your thinking opens up the channel of that trust and therefore the results of that trust. That you're convinced totally that this is what will happen to you, and that itself is what causes it to be so. And of course, God forbid, the opposite is also true. So I suggest you read the Sikha, that therefore trust now takes on a new dimension. Besides it just not being faith, it's trust that it will actually happen. It's also that trust is more than just a verb. It's a catalyst that initiates and draws down the thing you're trusting in and what you're expecting and want and trusting God in. So that's the general gist of the difference between the two. Let me see. Are there levels in it? Absolutely there are levels. We all know there are levels, but that's not for now. And I will just move now to the essays. So we have 3 essays again. It's all from last year's contest. Last year's contest keeps feeding these essays. We'll do the essays. It begins with, give me a moment here. Essay beginning with ourselves. Arya Weinstein, 43, Shliach of Bucks County, Newtown, Pennsylvania. Beginning with ourselves, very beautifully written essay, where it begins, far too often when we find ourselves in an uncomfortable or upsetting situation, we point fingers at others. In our attempt to understand what went wrong, we refuse to take responsibility. Indeed, we blame. Through blaming, we place a tremendous strain on our interpersonal relationships. This leads to much of the disunity found within relationships. Chassidus teaches us to begin seeking a solution not from without, but trying to fix others, but rather from within by correcting ourselves first. In a very practical way, he goes into how one, instead of going to leading to blame, which creates distance, going and looking at yourself, and cites to look at ourselves. What I'm focused when I get emotional about myself or the other person. To ask yourself the question: who am I focused on when I get emotional about a situation, myself or the other person? And he cites the Hayem Yem from the Rebbe's first collection or book, from the book of Yikra, that not to hate your brother in your heart, and he discusses the 3 steps in that process. Anyway, the bottom line is that it comes to that the Rebbe uses the word bevadai. That when a person, because this verse goes like this: you shall not hate your brother, you shall surely rebuke your fellow, you shall not bear a sin on his account, which means that the rebuke has to come from love. And then certainly you won't hate him. So he goes on to explain how that from taking this Torah you apply it to yourself instead of blaming others in a very, as I said, practical essay that leads to a methodology at the conclusion, how to respond to an incident, how you begin by first saying, who am I concerned about at this moment, myself or the other person, using empathy to relate to other people. And once you speak to them, if they listen, become aware of how this has brought you closer then rather than further from them. If they don't listen, discuss with a friend what you said and seek out their assistance in discovering the hidden agenda in your words. Okay, so I commend you for this. This essay, as well as all others, can be seen at meaningfullife.com/essays. Essay number 2 is Hypocrisy by Mendel Edelman, age 22, Yeshivas Er Elchanan, Hadley, Massachusetts. Hypocrisy. Okay, hypocrisy is considered by some to be the 8th cardinal sin of man. Being consistently evil in some ways is better than being inconsistently nice. Inconsistency is thought to be the hallmark of a man's weak character, of one who can not decisively control his own actions. Hypocrisy is to be avoided like rush hour traffic. I would say even more based on this assumption. He goes into a whole discussion that this ingrained fear of hypocrisy basically inhibits us from doing a lot of great things. Because we always say to ourselves, second guess ourselves, can we really do it? Am I really for real? Am I being honest? I'm being dishonest. And it says, Chassidic thought starkly belays this immobilizing notion by explaining the idea of creation, that creation is constantly in motion, meaning that God is constantly recreating the world from fresh. This teaches us, he says, to look at life as being something you have to constantly be renewing and not looking at always perfection. And the greatest affirmation of the enduring value of God's existence is that existence has value to it. So if that's the case, since everything is being created anew, how could you hold back from doing the correct thing now just because of a future that currently does not even have the potential to exist, because maybe you won't be consistent? It's innovative, interesting take on the issue of hypocrisy. And essay number 3, Small Actions for Deep and Lasting Change, by Shneir Ashkenazi, 36, Shliach Rishon LeZion, Israel. So this is basically about choice. That the modern society tries to teach us that we really can't change anything. Everything is just predestined, and that's that, we're stuck. And he goes into a whole thing about basically that makes you lack of control in your life because there's no real choice. Discusses it obviously from a Chassidic point of view, and both in action, in how we speak, and how we think. That in all those areas, there's an element where you have control, how to regain control, and it comes down to small acts each step of the way that helps a person get to that type of stage. Very well done as well, structured with practical exercises. And it talks about real life scenarios of people who have enthusiasm, lack of enthusiasm, and so on. So with that, we have the 3 essays. And with that, we shall also conclude, being that it's less than 2 weeks to Pesach. And the Rebbe says there's the day, 30 days before the holiday, we begin to prepare, including Moyes Chitim, helping those that need the help for Pesach. Especially 2 weeks ahead, according to all opinions, is the time when we get even closer. We've already finished with the new moon. The new moon of Nisan has entered. We're now in Beis Nisan, the 2nd day. And every day progressively closer. This is the Chedusha Geula, not just on the 15th of the month, but Chedusha Geula B'Nisan Nigalu B'Nisan Hasidim Ligoel. So may it be a redemptive month for everyone. And as I said, next week we'll be announcing, please God, the winners of the 2nd annual MyLife Chassidus Applied essay contest. So stay tuned for that. Everyone should have a very redemptive week and month, and one that connects us with the Nisim in an eternal way. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 111. Until next week, Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Everyone have a blessed week.